It was a quiet summer evening, the kind of evening when the air feels thick with heat but calm with peace. The sun hung low, painting the pool water with streaks of amber and gold. Marcus, a hard-working man in his late 30s, had just finished a grueling week at his office job. He wasn't rich, but he had worked tirelessly, often 2 or 3 jobs, to give his family stability, to buy a modest home in a middle-class neighborhood where his children could grow without fear. That evening, he sat by the pool behind his house, a glass of iced tea in hand, trying to let the weight of the week slip off his shoulders. Marcus leaned back, closed his eyes, and listened to the gentle sound of water rippling against the pool tiles. This was his sanctuary, his small corner of peace in a world that too often seemed to chip away at it. But peace for a black man has never been guaranteed. It can be shattered in seconds, sometimes by a knock at the door, sometimes by flashing lights, and sometimes by the sound of voices that carry not protection, but suspicion. That evening, his peace was broken by the sudden screech of car tires and the heavy stomp of boots. 2 uniformed officers entered the backyard without invitation, their hands already hovering near their holsters. "Hey, what are you doing here?" one barked, his voice sharp, not with curiosity, but with accusation. Marcus sat up, confused. "This is my home," he replied calmly, his voice steady, though his heart had begun to race. "I live here. I'm just relaxing by my pool." The officers didn't slow down. They looked at each other, smirking, as if his words were a performance. "We got a call," the taller officer said, adjusting his belt. "Suspicious man loitering. Trespassing, maybe. You got ID on you?" Marcus took a deep breath. He knew the script. He had lived it before, as had so many black men before him. The presumption of guilt followed him like a shadow he could never shake off. But this time, it cut deeper. This was his property, his pool. His sweat and labor had paid for this home. Yet in the eyes of these men, none of that mattered. His skin erased all evidence of belonging. "I do have ID," Marcus said slowly, "but you had no right to come onto my property like this. Did you have a warrant? Did you knock on my door?" His tone was measured, respectful, but firm. That firmness set the officers on edge. Authority does not like to be questioned, especially not by those it has been trained to control. The shorter officer stepped closer, his hand brushing against the grip of his gun. "Don't get smart with us. Just show your ID or we're going to have a problem." Marcus swallowed hard. He could feel the anger rising in his chest, but anger could be dangerous. He thought of his children inside, his wife preparing dinner. He couldn't risk escalating this into something that might leave them without him. So he nodded, keeping his movements slow and deliberate, and reached for his wallet on the small table by the pool. The officers tensed, as though even that motion might justify force. He handed over his license, and they examined it with exaggerated scrutiny. "This says you live here," the taller one muttered reluctantly, almost as though disappointed. "Yeah, well, we'll just confirm." They spoke into their radios, calling in the address, treating Marcus as though he were still under suspicion, as though his word and his identification were not enough. Marcus sat silently watching them, his chest tight with a mixture of fear and humiliation. He remembered his father's words told to him as a boy. "Son, in this country, sometimes you can do everything right, and still they will see you as wrong. But never forget who you are. Never let them steal your dignity." Tonight, those words rang louder than ever. He would not let them strip him of his humanity, even as they tried. The minutes dragged on like hours. Neighbors began to peek through blinds and over fences. Whispers spread. Some looked on with concern, others with curiosity, and a few with that familiar look of subtle satisfaction. The look that said, "Yes, order is being kept. He doesn't belong here anyway." Marcus felt the weight of those gazes as sharply as the weight of the officer's scrutiny. Finally, the radio crackled back. Confirmation. The house was indeed Marcus's. The ID was valid. There was no trespassing, no crime. But instead of an apology, the officers doubled down. "You should be more careful," the shorter one sneered. "Sitting out here like this, people might get the wrong idea." "The wrong idea?" The phrase lingered in the air, bitter and sharp. Marcus wanted to shout, to demand accountability, but he knew that the confrontation wasn't truly over. It was only shifting. The officers turned as if to leave, their boots heavy against the pavement. But Marcus stood, his voice steady now, carrying the power of a man who refused to be silent. "Wait," he called out. They paused, irritated that their authority had not dismissed him into silence. "You came onto my property without cause. You accused me of crimes in front of my neighbors. You treated me like a criminal for simply sitting by my own pool. And now you want to walk away as though nothing happened? Not tonight, not anymore." And there was a stillness in the air, a shift that neither officer had anticipated. Marcus wasn't raising his voice. He wasn't making sudden moves. He was speaking with dignity, with a clarity that pierced through their posturing. "I have cameras here," he continued, gesturing toward the small security devices mounted discreetly around his backyard. "Everything you said, everything you did has been recorded. And when I'm done, the whole world will see exactly how you harass a man for nothing more than the color of his skin." The taller officer's jaw tightened. The shorter one cursed under his breath. They hadn't expected this. They had expected compliance, maybe even submission. What they got instead was resistance grounded in truth. Marcus didn't need to shout. He didn't need to fight. His weapon was the truth, and the truth was undeniable. In that moment, Marcus felt the tide turning. Not completely, because centuries of injustice don't dissolve in a single confrontation. But in this moment, he had reclaimed something that the system tried to strip from him: his voice, his dignity, his right to exist in peace. The officers stood frozen for a moment, caught between arrogance and uncertainty. Marcus's words echoed in the air, and though they tried to brush them off, he could see the unease in their eyes. They muttered something about just doing their job and walked back toward the street. But Marcus knew this was not the end. Not this time. For too long, silence had been their shield, and fear had been the cage. He had both the truth and the evidence, and he intended to use them. Night, after his children were asleep and his wife quietly urged him to be careful, Marcus sat at his kitchen table, replaying the footage from the backyard cameras. Every second was captured: the hostile tone, the threatening posture, the baseless accusations, and finally the officer's sneer when confronted with the truth. He watched it again and again, not because he doubted what happened, but because he knew how easily his reality could be dismissed without proof. He knew how often black voices were drowned out by official reports that twisted facts into excuses. But here, the cameras told the story without distortion. Mid-trying, Marcus uploaded the footage to his computer, his hands steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every black man who had been questioned while jogging in his own neighborhood, every black woman harassed for entering her apartment, every child who had been told they didn't belong where they stood. This was about his father's warnings, his grandfather's battles, his children's future. It was about drawing a line and saying, "No more." The next morning, he reached out to a local civil rights organization. He explained what had happened, provided the footage, and asked for guidance. Within hours, lawyers and advocates were on the phone with him, voices brimming with urgency and determination. They knew the weight of what he held in his hands. "Marcus," one of them said, "this isn't just harassment. This is systemic racism laid bare, and it's time people see it." By the following week, the video was online. At first, it spread quietly. A few shares, a few comments, mostly from those who knew Marcus personally. But soon it caught fire. The outrage was immediate. People across the city, then across the country, watched in disbelief as two officers harassed a man simply for existing on his own property. The sight of Marcus, calm and dignified, standing against them with nothing but his voice and his truth, struck a chord that resonated far beyond his backyard. Teen news stations picked it up. Hashtags spread across social media. Activists held signs with his name at protests. "By the pool" became a phrase repeated in chants, a reminder that even in the most private spaces, black existence was policed. Marcus's story was no longer just his own. It had become a mirror reflecting the experiences of countless others. The police department, faced with public outrage, tried to control the narrative. Statements were released claiming the officers had responded to a community concern. They spoke of miscommunication and unfortunate misunderstandings. But the footage told the truth. There was no misunderstanding. There was prejudice, plain and raw, unfolding in real time. No carefully worded statement could erase the sneer in the officer's voice when he told Marcus he gave off the wrong idea. Marcus stood firm. He attended community meetings, spoke at rallies, and appeared on talk shows, not as a victim, but as a man refusing to be silenced. He told his story with honesty, with pain, but also with pride. "I did nothing wrong," he said. "I was at peace in my own home, and they tried to take that from me. But they didn't succeed, and they will never succeed as long as we stand together, as long as we speak our truth." The officers were placed on leave pending investigation. To some, that sounded like accountability, but Marcus knew better. Leave was often a shield, not a punishment. He continued pressing for real justice, disciplinary action, policy changes, protections that would prevent others from enduring the same harassment. "This isn't just about me," he repeated again and again. "This is about making sure no other father, no other son, no other brother has to explain to his children why police treated him like a criminal in his own backyard." The movement grew. Neighbors who had once looked on in silence began knocking on his door, apologizing, offering support. Some admitted they had never realized how deeply ingrained the problem was until they saw it with their own eyes. Marcus accepted their words, but he didn't let them forget. "It shouldn't take a video," he told them gently but firmly. "It shouldn't take proof for you to believe us. Our stories have always been true." Through it all, Marcus remained grounded in the same strength that had guided him the night of the confrontation. His dignity was his armor. His truth was his weapon. He didn't fight with rage, though rage burned inside him. He didn't fight with violence, though fear had pressed him to the edge. He fought with the same quiet power that made the officers falter when he first stood tall by his pool. Standing at a podium in a crowded hall, Marcus looked out at the faces before him. Young activists, seasoned elders, mothers with children on their laps, fathers with determination in their eyes. He spoke not just of his own story, but of the countless stories it represented. He spoke of injustice, yes, but also of hope. "Every time we stand up, every time we refuse to be silenced, we move the world closer to justice," he said. "I didn't choose to be harassed that night, but I chose how to respond, and so can you. Dignity is our right, justice is our demand, and change is our destiny." The hall erupted in applause, not just for Marcus, but for every voice that had been silenced and now found strength through his. His children watched from the front row, eyes wide with pride. They would remember this moment, just as Marcus remembered his father's words. And maybe one day they would live in a world where such moments were no longer necessary. As the applause echoed, Marcus thought back to that summer evening, the calm water, the setting sun, the peace he had sought. His sanctuary had been invaded, but in fighting back, he had built a larger one, a sanctuary of truth, of community, of justice. And though the battle was far from over, he knew this: he had turned the tables. He had shown the world that peace, dignity, and strength could not be stolen. Not from him, not from his people, not ever again.